Today I'll be going over chapter 21 of Alanna Nash's book, Baby Let's Play House, Elvis Presley and the Woman Who Loved Him. Chapter 21 is titled Going Under. Tennessee Governor Bulford Ellington and Memphis Mayor Henry Loeb joined forces to declare February 25th, 1961 as Elvis Presley Day. At a luncheon, RCA presented Elvis with a diamond watch to honor record sales of 75 million. And later that day, Elvis played 2 charity shows at Ellis Auditorium, his first live performance in 3 years. Nash writes, quote, "The hometown paper raved that Elvis successfully blended Negro cotton field harmony, camp meeting fervor, Hollywood showmanship, beatnik nonchalance, and some of the manipulations of mass psychology. Of the $51,612 raised, $47,823 would go to 38 foundations and funds in the Bluff City, the remaining money to the Elvis Presley Youth Center in Tupelo. The contribution built on Elvis's early donation to a long list of Memphis area charities with input from the governor. Less than 2 weeks later, Elvis appeared before the Tennessee state legislature in Nashville to be honored for his contributions and to boost Memphis's global profile. Governor Ellington also hoped that the event would draw more tourists to Tennessee. Ellington's teen daughter, Anne, was attending Middle Tennessee State University, but she skipped classes that day to attend the event, which was well publicized. The Capitol was jammed with people in cars. Governor Ellington's staff were seated around a conference table waiting for Elvis to arrive. It was quite some time before he walked into the room. Anne remembers, "Here this entity was standing in the doorway with this black suit on and every hair immaculately combed. There was absolutely dead silence in the room. It was just like somebody had sucked all the air out of it." After shaking the governor's hand, Elvis sat down at the end of the table and they talked for a minute. Then the sergeant at arms said it was time to appear in front of the legislature. And Elvis said to Anne, "You're going, aren't you?" She told him she wasn't scheduled to be part of it, and he told her, "I need for you to go." She smiled and said, "I don't think I'm supposed to go. There's not a seat up there for me." Elvis didn't care and said, "Yeah, you've got to go." And he grabbed her hand. Anne looked at her father, who nodded his approval. Nash writes, "Then out they went, through the crowd, down the hallway, up the steps, and down into the opening of the legislature. After the governor and the Speaker of the House made their remarks, Elvis went up to the podium. Of course, the people just went bananas. You could hardly hear him because of the screaming," Anne says. Before he left that day, Elvis became a Tennessee colonel, and he thanked the legislature for the finest honor I've ever received. After that, Elvis went to the state penitentiary to see Johnny Bragg of the Prisoners, whose long ago newspaper profile had led him to Sam Phillips. Anne joined him, and then afterward, Elvis and Joe and Alan took her to the governor's residence. The 4 of them sat and talked before he went back to Memphis, but she said it was kind of awkward. The following weekend, Elvis was back in town to record at RCA's Studio B, and he called Anne, who invited him back to the governor's residence. When Elvis got there, a uniformed highway patrolman greeted him at the door, and he thought that was neat. Elvis and Anne sat and talked for a long time that evening while her parents were upstairs. Anne remembers, about 2 o'clock, there was a knock on the door, and the sergeant who was on duty at that time said, "Miss Anne, the governor's just called down and says he thinks it's time for the gentleman to go." Elvis rose then, saying, "Well, I'll see you tomorrow evening." It was an invitation for her to go to the recording studio with him. Anne said, "After he left, the 2 patrolmen were absolutely rolling on the floor laughing, and I couldn't figure out why. And then the sergeant told me, 'Well, that wasn't exactly what your father said. What he said was, it was time for the hound dog to go.'" Elvis spent the next 2 days recording the Something for Everybody album with Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana, along with the Nashville A-Team. Millie Kirkham often sang soprano with the A-Team, and Elvis loved working with her since they recorded Blue Christmas together in 1957. She was 6 months pregnant back then, and Elvis asked for a chair for her so she could sit down. When one of the members used foul language, Elvis said, "Please watch your language, there's a lady present." Nash writes, now he was equally protective of Anne, camouflaging her to bring her into the studio, where she sat off to the side or the back. He would invite her there more than once, and as if for inspiration, he always wanted me where he could see me, or at least acknowledge that I was standing behind him. That first night he played her Can't Help Falling in Love, which he was about to record in California for the soundtrack of Blue Hawaii. Elvis would try and hide their association from the press. Anne said, When it got time for us to leave the governor's residence, I always had a highway patrolman with me who drove me over to the motel where Elvis was staying. And then we switched cars and I would go to the studio with him. Then when everything in the parking lot was quiet and nobody was there, we would run in. We would be there till early in the morning and then go get some breakfast or come back to the residence. Then he'd turn around and head back for Memphis. Rumors were going around anyway that the two were in a relationship, and said, I think any female who had an opportunity to sit down and meet him, even for 5 minutes, would find a love for him that words cannot describe. But she wasn't interested in getting too serious with Elvis, and she just enjoyed their friendship. Nash writes, aside from their physical attraction, Elvis took a parental interest in her and apparently saw her as a twin substitute as well. When he told her, I need for you to go into the legislature, he meant it. As he had done with Priscilla, he formed a bond with her based on mutual loss and displacement, and said, he came into my life at a time that was very crucial for me. Her father's political career had taken a 13-year-old girl from a farm life and put me in a place that I was not accustomed to, was not prepared for. Elvis had the same kind of situation, just in a different world. He helped me adjust more than anybody else. I could tell him things that I'd never told anybody. One of the pieces of advice he gave her, how not to let hurts get to you so bad that you couldn't deal with them. He had already experienced so much of that, and I was just beginning it. Even though their relationship didn't last, they still cared about each other, and said, I always knew that if I ever needed him at any point in time, all I had to do was pick up the phone and call, and he would be there. A week after the studio sessions, Elvis was back in Los Angeles on the Paramount lot to begin filming Blue Hawaii. Nash writes, after the flat response to Elvis's last two dramas at 20th Century Fox, Hal Wallace had brought in two proven entities for the return to the musical format. Hal Cantor, the writer-director of Loving You, who would pen the story, and director Norman Torog, who had been at the helm of G.I. Blues and would go on to direct 7 more Presley pictures. Elvis would play Chad Gates, a young man from Mississippi who was fresh out of the army and who moves to Hawaii. His co-star would be 35-year-old Angela Lansbury, who plays his mother, and his love interest, Miley, would be played by Joan Blackman. Nash says, Hawaii had been admitted to the Union only 2 years before, and the milieu was wondrous to most moviegoers. It was also a place dear to Colonel Parker's heart, since Parker had spent his first hitch in the service at Fort Shafter. The cast and crew flew to Honolulu for location shooting on March 25, 1961. Elvis was 26 years old and at his peak physically, having received orders from Parker to get in shape, watch his weight, and use a sun lamp. Parker had also booked Elvis for a benefit concert that same night that raised over $62,000 for the USS Arizona Memorial. Parker had booked country comic Minnie Pearl as the opening act for the show, but she was unprepared for the magnitude of Elvis's fame until they landed in Hawaii, and 3,000 screaming females surrounded the plane. Minnie said, I began to get these chilling feelings that maybe I didn't want to be all that close to Elvis. The fans were all along the route he was taking to the Hawaiian Village Hotel, and my husband was afraid that we'd be trampled trying to get inside. I felt myself being lifted completely off my feet by all these people. The afternoon after the show, Minnie and some of the musicians were having a good time on the beach. She said, we got to talking about how we wished Elvis could come down and be with us, and we turned and looked up at his penthouse, which was facing the ocean. He was standing on the balcony looking down at us, the solitary figure, lonely looking, watching us have such a good time. He was literally a prisoner because of the fans. We sat there on the beach and talked about how it would be, what a price you pay for that sort of fame. One day, Darlene Tompkins, a 19-year-old cast member, visited Elvis in his penthouse. Darlene remembers, his buddies had gone out onto the wide patio which overlooked the beach, and they started yelling to him, Elvis, come out here. Some of the girls on the beach want to see you. I realized he was ignoring them, and I finally said, Elvis, those are your fans. You really should go out there and let them see you. He hesitated and then said, I probably shouldn't, whereupon I asked, well, why not? He kind of sighed for a second and then said, okay, come on out here with me and I'll show you what always happens. The two of us walked out onto the patio, and an immediate cheer went up from the crowd of people, mostly beautiful young women. No sooner had we gotten to the railing before a number of the young females began taking their bikini bathing suit tops off and waving them around in the air, while the ones wearing one-piece suits pulled their tops down, trying to catch his attention. Elvis immediately yelled, come on now, girls, don't do that. which was quickly met by a resounding, keep doing it from Elvis's guy friends. Elvis looked sheepishly at me and in an embarrassed tone said, that's what the girls always do. The first time she met Elvis was when they ran into each other in the hallway of the hotel. Elvis said, hi, how are you? She doesn't remember much of their conversation, and she said, I was so nervous and my legs were so wobbly I was afraid I was going to fall to the floor right there in front of him. I just remember thinking as we stood there chatting, I can't believe how beautiful he is, more so than in any picture I've ever seen of him. It was an experience I'll never forget. Their relationship would progress further, but just to kissing, and Elvis also had a brief infatuation with another bit role player named Pamela Kirk, who would later appear on Kiss and Cousins. Nash writes, his more intense love interest was his scripted girlfriend, Joan Blackman, who bore a slight resemblance to both his mother and to Priscilla, Joe Esposito thought. Joan understood the attraction. He was always looking for someone with black hair and blue eyes, and I had that naturally. She was cast in Blue Hawaii only 11 days before shooting, replacing Julia Prowse, who made too many demands for Hal Wallace's liking. The day she walked on the set, Joan says, Elvis approached her and said, man, you're beautiful. Joe counts their romance as one of Elvis's real relationships, though it was brief. Joan remembers, we had rooms next to each other in the hotel, and for weeks we just about lived together. But her career came first. She said, if it came to a toss-up between meeting Elvis for dinner or getting my sleep because of having to be on the set the next day, my work always won. She also objected to the entourage. It's hard to talk with 8 people at a time and really relate. Joan claims she had met Elvis at Paramount in 1957 and that they dated for a year before he went into the Army. She said, there was something between us. He had really liked me when I knew him before, and some of that rekindled on the set. Had I not been dating someone else at the time we filmed, things could have gotten serious between us. Joan says Blue Hawaii was not really a fun movie to shoot because Hal Wallace was very serious and ran his sets in the same tone. She said, in certain dialogue scenes, Elvis was very nervous. He used to hold my hand until I thought he'd never let me go. If one of the guys from the entourage accidentally ruined a take, Elvis would lighten up the tension by cupping his hands around his mouth like he was a loudspeaker and say, Flight 247 now leaving from Honolulu to Memphis with Charlie Hodge on board. But Joan also found Elvis to be very passive, and he wouldn't object to the dialogue that he found difficult. He just went with what he was told. She said, it takes a lot of courage to take a chance and fight for it, to say, I want this. I don't think he could handle that. He didn't want to make waves. Joe Esposito said, the Army calmed him down, but it hurt him more than it helped him because it tamed him too much. When he came out, he became more oriented to do what he was told. And because of his upbringing, he could never stand up to a person who was older than he was. He could scream and yell and chew us out, but he was taught to always respect his elders. That hurt him in his career. He should have said, this is what I want to do. Let's try it. And if it doesn't work, I'll understand. That's why he made so many mediocre movies. Joan felt that Elvis put too much trust in the directors, including Torog, and if Elvis had gone with his instincts, she says, he might have done some different kinds of films. Musically, Blue Hawaii followed the same format as GI Blues, only it had 3 more songs than its predecessor. Nash writes, but it easily surpassed it at the box office and quickly recouped its $2 million budget. In placing Elvis in an exotic locale and wedding a plethora of romance to nonstop music, the film's biggest hit, Can't Help Falling in Love, fell just short of number 1, and the soundtrack topped the charts, selling 2 million copies in the first year alone. Wallace had perfected his winning Presley formula. The popularity of Blue Hawaii doomed Elvis's chances of ever returning to serious dramatic fare, and only rarely did he even attempt to venture beyond the film's stifling structure. Elvis's next film was Follow That Dream, which would be produced by David Weisbart and be filmed in Crystal River, Florida. Nash describes it as an embarrassing mishmash of a movie about a blended family, welfare, and homesteading. But there were some positives. Elvis's co-star, Anne Helms, said, Elvis was really good in that film. I thought he was a wonderful actor. He had a scene where we were in a courtroom, and they had hired all the townspeople to be extras. He turned to them and gave a very emotional speech about why the children should not be taken away from us. He was so believable that he had the townspeople in tears. It was interesting to see because I had never thought about him as an actor. Who was on Elvis's mind when he found out he was going to be in Florida for 3 weeks? Jackie Rowland, who was now 19 years old. Her mom, though, still didn't approve of their friendship, and she had declined Gladys's invitation to go to Graceland. Now, her mom was on the fence about allowing Jackie to go to Crystal River until finally she decided that they'd go, but by the time that they arrived, Elvis wasn't there anymore. Jackie said, Elvis had gone and left a message that he couldn't wait for me any longer. I knew at that point it was a hopeless cause for the two of us. He would never send her an invitation again, but he would have RCA continue to send her his records into the 70s. Joanna Moore also co-starred in the film Follow That Dream alongside Helm. Elvis got along better with Helm, and she became one of the guys and would join them when they played poker. She said, I lost money. One time I had to write a check to Elvis to cover my loss. He didn't cash that check for a long time, Nash writes. In many ways, her character mirrored Elvis's fantasies about Sandy Farrah and Priscilla Beaulieu. As Holly Jones, Anne played a live-in orphan who grows up under Elvis's protective eye, maturing from a scrawny teen to a young woman. You know anything about sex, Holly? His character asks. Helm said, I really fell for Elvis. I mean, who wouldn't? We did have a romance, and it was quite wonderful. They'd go for drives at night in his Cadillac, and they'd listen to the radio. She remembers, it was so strange when Hound Dog would come on, and there I was sitting next to him. They didn't just drive around at night, though. Helm said, he really liked sex. A lot of nights I didn't go back to my own bungalow. I felt a little ashamed about it the next morning, because I knew that the people on the set realized what was going on. At the same time, though, I had fun, and it was special. Helm got her first glimpse of how famous Elvis was when she accompanied him in Weeki Wachee Springs, Florida on July 30th, 1961. He was there for a special ceremony honoring his achievements. While there, the ex-Carney Parker had set up a mermaid show that he called Elvis Presley Underwater Fan Club. A wire fence had been erected to keep the thousands of crazed fans at bay. Helm was overwhelmed because she had not seen such madness for someone, and was touched when Elvis stayed for several hours walking along the fence, talking with people and signing autographs. Nash writes, she continued to see him when they returned to California, but she found it more difficult to date him there, where he no longer knocked on her door and brought her flowers, and where his parties consisted of carpet-to-carpet women, mostly young girls. One night at the piano, he said something to her that angered her, and she pulled the piano lid down on his hands. It hurt his finger, and Helm remembers, he was really mad for the first time at me. She apologized, but he was still upset, so the next day, she went out and bought a gag gift, a giant rubber thumb. She sent it to Elvis along with the note, but he never spoke with her again. She knew she had to let it go and just cherish the memories they had together in Florida, because in California, she said, he had many lives. He had many women around him. It wasn't like Crystal River where I had him all to myself every night. But Nash writes that was only because Elvis had become frightened of Joanna Moore. Moore had a reputation of being promiscuous, and Joe said, sure enough, they went off together. But their fling didn't last long because Elvis found her odd and emotionally fragile. Nash writes, she spoke in a voice that was both high-pitched and tense, and she was far too effusive with both the guys and with Elvis, declaring her love for him almost immediately. When she became clingy, he moved on to Anne. But back in California, Moore was determined she would not be ignored, and Joe remembers that late one night she showed up at Elvis's door, looking disheveled and slurring her words. She wanted to see Elvis, and when Joe told her he was asleep, she started crying and tried to force her way into the house. Moore passed out in Joe's and Charlie's arms. Charlie got a wet cloth and revived Joan, and Joe asked her what was so important that she had to speak to Elvis at that moment. She said, Elvis got me pregnant, and I took a bunch of sleeping pills. I have to talk to him. Charlie and Joe took her to UCLA emergency room, and the doctors pumped her stomach. When they told Elvis the next morning about what happened, he said, make sure you call and find out how she's doing today. I knew that girl had problems. That's why I stopped seeing her. Joe said the doctors found no evidence of the pregnancy. Elvis's next film was Kid Galahad, and he was once more romantically paired with Joan Blackman. He had requested her on the film, but by the time it went into production, he was also involved with 23-year-old Connie Stevens, who he'd seen in the Hawaiian Eye television series. When he asked Connie out, she remembers, I knew this was a fellow who could break your heart, but he was just too beautiful to resist. They dated on and off for 2 years, and she said she really cared about him, and she tried to find a way for him to live a more normal life and to not be so isolated because of his fame. By this time, Elvis stopped carrying a wallet. Joe said, Elvis never carried a dime in his pocket no matter where he went. So I wonder why he stopped carrying a wallet. Was he afraid he was going to get robbed? I mean, he was always surrounded by guys, right? Nash writes, and when it came to women, it was as if he had forgotten how to date. As for being mobbed, once he got past the gate girls who waited all day and night for him to come out, surely he could just go to dinner and a movie in the film star capital of the world, couldn't he? Connie remembers, he finally listened to me long enough, and we went to Grauman's Chinese theater, and I thought, I'll never put this guy through this again. I remember Joe put money in his pocket, and he was nervous as hell. And we went out in the car, and he wore his favorite cap, and we ran out of gas. He was just panic-stricken. Don't worry, we'll push this car. They were able to get to a gas station and made it to the theater. But as he had done in Germany, Elvis waited until the movie started before going in so he wouldn't be recognized, and then left before the movie ended for the same reason. Connie said, sure enough, we got out into the car and we were going home laughing about the whole night. And he went to reach for his favorite cap and it was gone. That was so typical, people wanting a piece of him all of the time. Connie wanted to be in a committed relationship with Elvis. She said, but one of the things I knew instinctively was that he probably couldn't be captured and shouldn't be captured because he was so special that he needed to be in the world. He was a very dear, precious person. She would go on to marry Eddie Fisher, but she said of Elvis, he was one of the loves of my life. I could have spent a lifetime with him, and I knew it was never to be. The other woman he saw was an issue, but so was his entourage. Connie said, you had to follow the crowd. I got tired of going out with 11 guys for dinner. Nash writes, by spring 1962, the entourage included Joe, Jean, Lamar, Alan, Billy, and Ray Chief Sitten. Sonny, Red, and Charlie were still part of the mafia, though they all sought independent work, and Sonny and Red in Hollywood, and Charlie with country singer Jimmy Wakely. Cliff would continue to be hired and fired with regularity, and Lamar would soon be gone, though only temporarily after a blow-up with Elvis. Patty Perry kept her job as a hairdresser, but would travel with Elvis 3 days a week when he was in California. Marty Lacker would come and go in the entourage in the early 1960s, and quickly grew to enjoy pills, specifically downers. For road trips, Elvis paid more than $10,000 for a 1962 Dodge motorhome, and he would later have George Barris customize it specifically for his needs. Neighbors at the Perugia Way house began to complain about all the girls that would gather out front. So at the end of 1961, Elvis moved to another elegant rental nearby. 10539 Bellagio Road was a grand mansion, according to Joe, and even came with the butler. Nash writes, they had been there only a few days, according to Alan Fortis, when Elvis mourned the fact that he hadn't brought along the source of much of his fun on Perugia Way, a two-way mirror, which he used to spy on the guys and their dates in the den. It was small, maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, but it fed Elvis's growing interest in voyeurism, and the guys loved it too, even if the women didn't. Tuesday Weld came over one time and looked through it and called them all a bunch of adolescents. At the Bellagio Road home, there was a cabana where women would change into bathing suits, so Sonny got the idea to install a huge two-way mirror in it. It worked only at the back of the cabana, so the guys had to crawl under the house to see anything. The first time girls came over for a pool party, Alan was surprised to see Elvis with dirt on his cheeks and a big smear across his forehead. Alan told him, I can't believe you crawled under there. Hell, Elvis, they'll let you look. Elvis said, yeah, but it's a lot more fun this way. Around this time, Elvis acquired a 40-pound chimpanzee named Scatter that had retired from a children's TV show in Memphis. Scatter liked to stick his head up women's skirts and unbutton their blouses and would hide behind bathroom doors to scare the crap out of women. Nash writes, the first time Patty Perry came over after Elvis brought Scatter out to California, he came in the room screeching with his hands up, every hair standing on end, and Patty thought he was going to attack her. Scatter only wanted to look up her skirt, but when she told him to stop and he didn't, she said, you do that one more time and I'm going to knock the hell out of you. Billy Smith said, naturally, he did it again. So Patty hit Scatter under the chin and he did a backflip and landed on the couch disoriented. Billy said, he looked at her like he couldn't believe it. Scatter had a head like a bowling ball, but she put a dent in it. Alan and Sonny, who found Scatter hilarious, would sometimes send him into a bedroom where they knew a couple was getting it on, and Scatter would get excited and jump on the man's back. Elvis thought it was funny too, but not so much when Scatter would fondle himself in front of female guests. Marty Lacker said. Believe it or not, we did not teach him to do that, Nash writes. But it fascinated Elvis, who was becoming more and more interested in all things sexual. Soon he would ask Alan to have soft porn films made for him, often of two girls wrestling in white cotton panties. It was a flashback of sorts to his childhood turn-on, seeing his two aunts dancing together and waving their skirts up in the air. Okay, those are her words, not mine. To put it into context, though, Patty Perry said, listen, you got to realize 19-year-old truck driver overnight becomes superstar and super stud, which he wasn't. Scatter's antics were beginning to wear on the guys. He destroyed the drapes in hotel rooms and punched a hole in Elvis's 35 millimeter projection screen and bit the hired help. One night he escaped and crashed a neighbor's cocktail party and ran amok as guests stood on tables and the backs of couches. Scatter didn't have a specific caretaker, so no one could control him. Lamar hated the chimp and poked him with a cattle prod, and Elvis whacked him with a pool cue. Scatter was eventually returned home to Memphis, where he lived in a cage behind Graceland, but he wasn't well behaved there either. A maid named Daisy went in to feed him, and he tore her wig off. Scatter was found dead not too long after, clinging to his cage, and Elvis often wondered if Daisy had poisoned him. Nash says Elvis's own treatment of Scatter was indicative of how his behavior continued to change in the wake of his frustration over his film career and his escalating dependency on drugs. In 1962, his temper got worse and worse with women who attended his house parties. One time he got so mad at an actress, he hurled a watermelon at her and it hit her on her rump. On another occasion, there was a guest named Judy who was persistently trying to get Elvis's attention. He went downstairs to play pool and she followed him. Elvis finally told her, "Look, I'm shooting pool and I'm going to finish this game before I do anything else." Judy picked up the cue ball and this angered Elvis. He told her, "If you do that again, they'll have to surgically remove it." She looked him right in the eye and said, "You're a smart-ass son of a bitch, aren't you?" Nash writes, no one called Elvis a son of a bitch. To him, it was a slur against Gladys, and he launched the cue stick before he even knew what he had done, hitting the girl in the chest near the collarbone and almost harpooning her. Joe remembers, "She fell right over. That was the first time I saw him really, really mad, just unbelievably mad." Elvis ran over to her and told one of the guys to take her to a doctor, but he didn't apologize. He cried about it later, though. Lamar said, Elvis had no parameters. He moved the lines of behavior wherever he wanted them, and if he went too far, he moved them out farther. His discipline was non-existent, and the more insulated he got, the stranger he got. Elvis's next film was Girls, 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 which began production in March of 1962. Hal Wallace would produce it, and Norman Taurog would again direct it. Wallace at this point did not view Elvis as a serious actor and only as an entertainer that was good in light musical comedies. Nash writes, to that end, Elvis would begin a long series of movies in which he would play the carefree bachelor with an offbeat occupation. The plot almost always turned on some feeble predicament over which he would triumph, winning the girl in the process. For Girls, 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 he was cast as a charter boat pilot who moonlights as a lounge singer to buy a sailboat that once belonged to his father. The musical numbers were slighter than those in Blue Hawaii, and Elvis was humiliated by having to sing to a crustacean, Song of the Shrimp, and warble about the joys of ocean fishing were coming in loaded. He channeled his discontent through karate, breaking as many as 40 boards a day in his hotel suite, until Wallace stopped him, fearing the star would injure his hand. The only silver lining in that movie for Elvis was the song Return to Sender, which sat on the charts at number 2 for 14 weeks. It followed the success of his other songs, Can't Help Falling in Love, Good Luck Charm, and Marie's the Name, his latest flame. There was one song from the film, though, that had become a private joke between Elvis and the guys. It was a dance number called The Walls Have Ears with his co-star Laurel Goodwin. Joe wrote in his autobiography, he dressed in black trousers made for the scene without putting on underwear. Elvis rarely used underwear. Elvis said to him, "Hey, Joe, these pants don't feel right. They're rubbing me the wrong way." Joe continues in his book, the dance scene was complicated. The apartment was rigged for special effects, including a coffee table that bounced around the floor and a ceiling that crashed down a few seconds later after Elvis and Laurel jumped backward out of the way and onto a floor model record console. At some point during all the wiggling and jumping, little Elvis, as he called it, became erect. After the scene was shot, Elvis walked off the set and went straight to a chair and sat down. Tori hadn't noticed anything while filming. Elvis whispered to Joe, "Did you see that? I couldn't stop the feeling. Geez, I hope they don't have to reshoot this. The ceiling might get me this time." Joe told all the guys about it, and they all teased him to no end. When Elvis saw the scene at the dailies, Elvis said, "Hot damn, will you look at that?" Little Elvis could be seen prominently under his trousers, and Joe told him that would probably be edited out. Elvis said, "Man, I hope they don't see it and decide to cut it off before we get out of here." The final cut of the movie does include prominent little Elvis. It was not edited out. As far as the movie itself, Laurel Goodwin remembers, "Elvis did not like this film. Once he commented to me, 'One thing about working with Wallace is that he spends a lot of money on the production, the accommodations, the catering, because he has me so cheap. With the money he makes on my movies, he can then afford to go off and do Beckett.'" Dolores Hart was supposed to play Goodwin's character, but then decided to join the convent. Elvis got along well with Goodwin, though. He told her about losing Gladys 4 years earlier, and Goodwin said he truly believed he would one day rejoin his beloved mother. Elvis, however, did not get along with his co-star Stella Stevens, despite herself being a fellow Southerner from Mississippi. Goodwin said Stella had to be ordered by Hal Wallace, to whom she was under contract to do the film. Stella admits that she didn't want to make an Elvis Presley picture and said, "I was looking to work with great actors." When she read the script, she flung it across the room, calling it dreck. And she didn't like that she was the character that Elvis dumps. She's never watched the film and never will. Stella said, "I was thought of as the bad girl while Elvis was crazy about little girls in white cotton panties." She said she never dated Elvis because Red West had called her to go over and hang out, but she thought Elvis should have been the one to call. Stella had gotten married at 15 and had a baby at 16 and then gotten divorced at 17. She said of the entourage, "They were just a group of boys having fun, but I was a grown woman by then, or life had made me one. I had nothing against Elvis. I thought he was greatly talented. But professionally, they didn't have the same mindset." Stella remembers, "I said, 'Why do you do pictures like this instead of seeking out the best directors in the business?' He said, 'Why knock success?' I wasn't knocking it. I was saying there are no limits to the work you could do, rather than these singing and a loving and a fighting films." She knew, though, that the more she talked, the more he disliked her. Nash writes, quote, "In recent years, when a fan approached her for an autograph and asked what it was like working with Elvis, Stevens reportedly said she couldn't stand him and that when they were alone together, he forced himself on her and she had to fight him off. Whether that was true, more and more, the angry Elvis used physical force with women, including Anita." In early 1962, Anita was at the Bellagio Roadhouse while Elvis was on set filming Girls, Girls, Girls. She was in the library to pick out a book to read, and when she found one, in it was a letter from Priscilla to Elvis. Anita said, "I remember it said something to the effect of, 'Please call my daddy,' and 'If you call my daddy, I know he'll let me come over there. I want to come over there so bad,' like young girls talk." She stood there reading the letter, unable to catch her breath. She remembers, "Elvis had said, 'She's a friend. She means nothing. She's a fan.'" As soon as Elvis returned home from the set, she confronted him. "I said, 'What is this letter? Who is this Priscilla? You said she was just a child.' I was just furious, and he was furious too, because I had found it. Oh, he was so upset. He grabbed me and threw me up against the closet. I said, 'You're telling stories, and everything you said was a lie.' I packed my bags and came back home that night to Graceland, to Grandma." When Anita walked into Graceland, the phone was ringing, and she knew it was Elvis, but she didn't want to talk to him. It kept ringing, so she finally answered it. "Did Elvis apologize?" "No," she said. "I remember when he got me on the phone, he said, 'Little, please don't tell anybody about this. This girl, again, she's just a child. She's just a 14-year-old child. It means absolutely nothing. She just wants to visit, and if you told anybody, I'd get in a lot of trouble. She's so young.' He just begged me, 'Little, little, little.' I just couldn't imagine coming over to the United States. It didn't sound right to me. But I said, I won't tell anybody. And I never did. I never did tell anybody." That's it for chapter 21. Stay tuned for chapter 22, which is titled A Little Happiness. See you then.